Hey South High Red Wings, it's Mrs. Vorpal, your school social worker here, carrying on with our May is Mental Health Awareness Month advisory videos. I am here today with my friend Frank Simak. Frank is one of the mental health counselors who works here as part of our PATH program. For those of you who do not know what PATH is, it stands for Providing Access to Healing. And it is a wonderful partnership we have had with United Way and Lakeshore Community Healthcare Center and Mental Health America in the school district for the last 5 years?
5 years.
5 years. The idea behind PATH is that for some of our students, some of you, access to mental health care is a really tough thing. And being able to obtain that out in the community can present itself with many barriers. So we started the PATH program here that allows students who qualify the opportunity to see a therapist right here in school at South High during the school day. It's actually part of your schedule. That program has grown and is so popular, partially because this guy over here is such a phenomenal counselor. We now have a very long wait list to even get a spot in this program. So when I was brainstorming, who do I want to talk to about anxiety in particular, there was no doubt it was going to be Frank. So thank you.
Absolutely.
For hanging out with me a little bit today. Frank, we've been talking about mental health in general, but specifically about anxiety and depression. The last advisory video that our students saw kind of laid out what anxiety is and what depression is. And when we're talking mental illness, we're talking very specific symptoms and criteria that a professional has to use to diagnose depression or anxiety.
Absolutely.
And we know that right here at South High, over 30% of our students are struggling with anxiety. That's right. You heard me right. A third of our students here identified on the YRBS that they're struggling.
And we can normalize that everyone experiences anxiety, right?
True.
So it's a normal emotion to experience.
Yep.
Does it elevate to the level of interfering with daily life and responsibilities? Maybe not, but it could still be discomforting and bothersome.
Amen. Yep. So what I wanted to talk with Frank about today isn't necessarily what he would work with somebody in therapy for. So if one of our students was seeing you for anxiety and they've been diagnosed with clinical anxiety, you do different things with them. But in general, what are some things that our students who are experiencing anxiety, which again, isn't necessarily a bad thing, anxiety, stress, what are some things that they can do to cope and to deal with that on a daily basis? I
think the first thing is just acknowledging that it's real, right? That it's what you're experiencing and going through in the moment, right? Because if we acknowledge it and we learn how to accept it and experience it, it doesn't have to linger longer than what it is, right? Because anxiety usually is the fear of the future, fear of something, right? Uncertainty. So I think of let's say taking a test, right? Ending the semester, there might be some tests upcoming.
Yes, final exams.
Yeah, so I'm fearful of I don't know how this test is going to play out, right? That's very real because we can't predict the future. But how can we acknowledge that in the moment so that we can just experience it, so we can kind of, I always like to call it pop the balloon of fear or anxiety. And some of the ways we could do that is just, acknowledging it and then challenging it, right? Have I done everything I can to attain the desired outcome that I want, right? Have I done things in my control, right? And if I've done that and I'm still feeling anxious or it's bothersome and trouble, other techniques is there's something called grounding, right? So what grounding is a technique. I think of anxiety as if you're holding a balloon and the balloon is floating you up into the sky, right? We're kind of feeling like we're becoming detached. And grounding means we're popping that balloon and we're coming back to the ground. What grounding can be fidgets, right? If anyone's ever used a fidget spinner or the varying kinds of fidgets, right? Playing with those physical fidgets help us draw our focus not to the emotion of anxiety, but to the here and now.
And the tactile feeling,
Absolutely.
The sensory experience of rubbing a stone or moving a Rubik's Cube, that there's a feeling that's attached to it.
Absolutely. Even the feeling of how your chair feels in the moment. If you're in a metal chair and you're touching it, you're describing it to yourself and how cold it is, or just how it takes our mind away from the anxiety in the moment, and we get relief from focusing on the chair.
I always tell students, tell me 3 things that you hear, 3 things that you see, 3 things that you smell, just anything that you can do that's sensory and brings you back to grounding, to what is right here and what is right now.
Yep.
And that way you're not, those thoughts that are lifting you up because of that balloon, that's not where you're at. You're at, where am I here?
Absolutely.
So,
The other thing too, I would say is, being aware of like challenging it, right? So understanding, what's the worst that could happen and does it match my fear, right? And one of the things that kind of gets said a lot is like, breathing and taking deep breaths. But it gets said a lot because it's very effective. Because what anxiety does, it speeds us up, right? Our heart beats faster. We start to lose, the thinking or executive parts of our brain. We start to our palms get sweaty a little bit. So that deep breathing helps slows everything down. It maybe even helps us feel a little bit more in control. Then we can pause and think of like, well, I've done everything I can. I've prepared. I know the material. The results of this is not going to be the worst case thing in the world, right? I will survive. Life will go on. In a couple months, days, years, I'm probably not going to remember this specific moment of anxiety.
I think of some of our students, some of you that I've met with who you have to go into class after it's already started. So all of your peers are there and there's learning going on and all you have to walk into the room, and how that can become overwhelming sometimes.
I agree. And the other thing too is like we can normalize this, right? Because everyone experiences anxiety in different forms of anxiety. So like social anxiety. But my perspective is that, if you were a student that's sitting in the classroom and someone walks in late, do you care? Is that a big deal? Do you
might
stare
look,
them down?
You might
right?
look, but that's it, right?
Yep. So then it's like, well, why am I going to be that unique where people are going to take notice or want to talk about how I walked into class 30 seconds later than I usually do? That experience, they'll probably forget that by 10 minutes from now.
Yeah. So again, finding what those thoughts are. Everybody's going to look at me if I come into this room. Right, but so what?
Yep.
It doesn't mean anything. It doesn't mean that they're judging you or other than,
they're here.
You are.
And now I'm going to be more focused on myself, right? Because if we're sitting in the chair and someone walks in, we'll notice that, take inventory, but then we're going to be like, okay, I'm back to focusing on myself, because that's what we want to do. We want to just focus on ourselves.
Excellent. Other ideas for maybe not normal anxiety, maybe when it gets to be a little bit more intense and maybe you start to feel that tightness and that panic.
I think having, close connections or people we can talk about with, right? Because, I always think like having thoughts in our head, it's different than when we say them out loud, right? Or even talking to ourselves. It sounds different when I verbalize it, talk about it, than what the thought is in my head. So sometimes too, it's deflating the fear balloon if I just say it out loud, right? So having those trusted connections, people in our lives that, are willing to be there and listen to us, right? And more often than not, I hear a lot, well, I don't want to burden others or, be burdensome. But truth be told, if those are our close relationships and our connections, they want those opportunities to help us because they care about us. And they'd rather have the experience of helping us than not being bothered or burdened. So definitely talking about it out loud.
And that can certainly be with your friends, with other people that are within your circle. But hopefully there are some adults in this building as well that you've developed a connection with and you're comfortable having some of those conversations with. And of course that means all of us in the counseling center, but it also means your teachers. Pretty much every teacher in this building has had some form of mental health first aid training. They know a little bit about this thing called anxiety, and the reality is mental health, mental illness, and just struggling with overall wellness since COVID is something that so many of us are dealing with. So do not be afraid to reach out to the people that love you and say, I don't know what's going on lately, but man, I just feel so overwhelmed and tight, and I just have so many thoughts about, I'm not good enough, or I'm not worthy, or people think things of me, or something horrible is going to happen. And
it's part of being human. And, kind of going back what you're saying too, is just we're not alone in these experiences or these thoughts, right? This is not a uniqueness to one person or the other. More likely than not, as you said, 30% of students here are experiencing something very similar. So definitely not alone in these experiences, and there's no reason to be alone when we have these experiences.
So we've talked about acknowledging our anxiety, naming it, putting it out there, acknowledging, yes, this is real and this is what I'm experiencing. We've talked about grounding, that idea that anxiety is a balloon that kind of lifts you away from reality and from where you're supposed to be, and the things you can do to pop that balloon, like fidgeting, like the tactile experiences.
Getting a drink of water.
Yeah.
Right? And saying, can I get a drink of water, walk to the water fountain, take a drink of water, and come back to class.
And even when you take that drink of water, just breathe a little bit. What does it feel like? What is that coolness feeling like going down my throat? Anything you can do to pull yourself away from that balloon that's lifting you up.
Absolutely. And also acknowledging, with this anxiety, have I done everything I can to resolve this anxiety? And if I haven't, that gives us information of like, oh, maybe I need to study more or ask for more help. But if I do feel comfortable with everything I have done, that's where a lot of those distraction techniques come in, because then our alarm systems aren't as accurate because we've done everything we can.
So, Frank, for students who are watching this and going, yeah, but you don't understand, my anxiety is way above everything that you're talking about. Like, I'm in a bad place. What advice do you have for them?
The best place to start with there at South High School is you, Ms. Vorpal, right? Coming to talk to Ms. Vorpal to see what opportunities there are for, consistent, ongoing help to learn, new thoughts, new behaviors, I always like to call it as new autopilot, right? Because, a lot of times when we practice a behavior over and over, so when we practice being anxious, we get really good at being anxious, right? It's hard to turn that autopilot off. And that's where, something a little bit more consistent and ongoing can help us learn how to create a new autopilot in our life where it's not driven by fear and anxiety, that we have control over what we do. So the best part is to start with you, talking to home about, resources with Mental Health America Lakeshore. They have a wonderful collection of community therapists to try to find someone who's available. But ultimately, I think the best person here in the building is you, Mrs. Vorpal.
Thank you for that suggestion. Yes, indeed. Your school counselors are also wonderful and are available to you. And I would like to direct you guys to the Mental Health America Lakeshore website. All kinds of great resources, depression screens, anxiety screens that you can take for free online. Your name isn't even on it. It's totally confidential. Just if you're wondering, okay, is what I'm experiencing normal anxiety, normal stress, or is it gone above and beyond that? Yeah. Thank you, Frank.
Absolutely.
For hanging out with me a little bit today and teaching our students some of the things that they can do to cope with feelings of anxiety. And we hope you guys all have a great rest of May, Mental Health Awareness Month. Thank you so much.
Thank you.